emotional health takes a toll because you're home by yourself all the time, or you're home with the same people 24 hours a day and you're starting to drive each other crazy. Other ways of making connections can be really powerful.
All right, squad. So I got a dear friend of mine, Joshua Ruberg, by the way, clinical psychologist. You should say hi to your fans.
Hello, fans. I didn't know I had any fans.
You got fans, brother. So, and I'm your fan right now. Not only that you are as smart as you are, and I know you love taking compliments, so you're going to probably say something clever that makes it not sound like you're smart right now. So I'm going to hijack that from you and say, I am a great benefactor of you being in my life and being in my tribe, because you do the thing that I always hope to do, which is anytime you and I have an interaction, you leave me better than how you found me. And that's like my big overarching trope that I aspire to in life. Like, that's like, if I focus on that, the rest takes care of itself. So you were one of the first people I spoke with, I thought about, and luckily you picked up my phone there, who I wanted to include in this conversation we're trying to have about, coping with the COVIDs, right? With your background and then all the stats that are coming in, and I know they're terrible, but let's just lay them out quickly so we can get past them. Domestic violence up through the roof. Who knows what's going to happen with the divorce stuff after this and all the family. And it's like, we kind of take for granted, much like myself, you careful what you wish for kind of thing. You always wish you had more time with the kids and the family. Well, now you got it. And what we're finding is that you might not have the tool set that's appropriate to be able to succeed in that, inside that space. So what can you share with us? And I know this isn't going to be a big thesis type thing, but if you had a couple, 2, 3, 4 points based on your practice and your background to just help folks get through this whole stay-at-home deal without killing each other.
Sure. So it's a bit of a challenge to have you and I talked about this a little bit before. I'm just going to open my computer back up, my other computer with my stuff here. To have a one size fits all kind of thing for everyone, because people are in so many different levels of stress depending on whether there's financial stress for some people is kind of like key number one. And if you're experiencing that, that's a whole other level of stress. And then not to mention like people in different areas like San Diego, where we are, things are pretty quiet, not a ton of infections. But if you're in a place like New York City or New Orleans or something like that, it could be really intense. But we kind of talked, and I came up with a kind of just kind of like 4, to keep it simple, kind of 4 tips that I thought kind of covered some of the important areas to kind of help you with the stress that you may be experiencing right now, because all of us are experiencing stress. This is I conceptualize this as a shared trauma that we're all experiencing.
Yeah, well said.
This is a traumatic experience. Everyone is afraid that they're either going to catch this or that a family member is going to catch it. Most everyone has family or friends that are in the more risky categories if they're not in the risky categories themselves. I think the government has done a decent job in some ways of trying to get people to be calm, depending on who you're listening to. But the more evidence that comes out, the more people in some ways are getting frightened. Although I think depending on what area you're in, there's also some encouraging news depending on kind of what part of the country, or even what state or what part of the state you're in. Some states are getting worse and some states are getting better. So there's a lot of anxiety out there. So I kind of came up with 4 ideas on just sort of 4 simple tips that I thought were a good place to start to keep it simple. One talks about social interaction. One talks about how to kind of just dealing with your emotions. One talks about kind of taking care of yourself. And then the other one talks about sort of the way you sort of think that what time frame you're thinking about making decisions in. I think all of those kind of can affect your coping with stress.
And I love that as a framework too, because I think you would be the first to say that in the work that you do, everything's one-to-one, meaning we're all little snowflakes, we're all different. I don't mean that in that way, right? Like, the popularized way, but in the sense that we're all different. We've all
Yeah.
got unique stuff that we're bringing into the conversation. So
Yeah.
as you approach it clinically, there's the unpacking of figuring out what the patterns are for the individual and then working from there. So this kind of like one to all really means one to none format that we're trying to accomplish here, because it's impossible for you to do that because
Right.
it's not one size fits all. But I love the idea though, that when you and I were talking on the phone about how, like, if you had a little bag, a little bag of tools that you could bring, something that you could just grab onto to say, hey, I'm going through a little spell right now. I'm having a little moment. A lot of people are having a lot of moments right now. Like,
Right.
what are some things that they can just kind of grab onto to get them through to the next
Yeah.
episode?
Well, so the first one I mentioned was social connection. We are all isolated right now. Even if you are home with family, so a lot of people have remarked, and I've thought to myself, like, this is in some ways what's going on. If you can find a silver lining, the ability to spend more time with family can be a blessing for people, but it also can be really stressful for people, depending on so many factors of what your family situation's like and how well you get along with family and all those kinds of things. But what I suggest, the first thing was to try to connect with others with intention.
Hmm.
Um, it's really, we're all isolated in some ways from the world that we previously were connected with. And we have to, some ways, with intention or with willfulness, try to find ways to connect in ways that we couldn't before, because we are social beings. We need these social connections. So whether it's, having conversations with people that you don't normally talk to, whether it's trying to find unique ways to connect with people that you normally would in other ways, like whether it's, web chats or whatever it may be, I like, for example, like, the recommendation is you spend at least 6 feet apart from people. So can you sit outside with a friend and sit at least 6 feet apart and still have a conversation with them? Like, you may not go to a bar and sit next to them on a bar stool, go to a coffee shop next to them up at the counter, but you may still be able to spend some time with people if you do it in a safe way. Or do you set up a group chat with some old friends or something like that? There are lots of ways to do this. But we have to be willful and think about how to do things in ways that we previously didn't need to. But it's really important to maintain these connections, because we're all very isolated right now. And with isolation comes that stress. Now, with isolation also perhaps reduces your risk of infection, which is why they're recommending it. But we have to find a balance between your physical and your emotional health. And if your emotional health takes a toll because you're home by yourself all the time, or you're home with the same people 24 hours a day and you're starting to drive each other crazy, other ways of making connections can be really powerful.
Yeah, I love that thought. And, one of the things that you mentioned to me, I think you referred to it as like riding the wave.
Mm.
And I found that to be, like, from a utilitarian perspective, something that I could imagine using that metaphor, like as you're going through those emotions. And I'd love to hear how you put a frame around that so eloquently.
So that was my second thing, was how to deal with your emotions. So a lot of people are going to be experiencing either emotions that they don't normally experience because they're not used to dealing with sort of traumatic situations like this in real time, or perhaps a resurgence of, maybe they've dealt with depression or anxiety or anger in the past, or substance use in the past. Maybe they've learned how to manage that, but then suddenly the tools that they used to use to manage those, maybe those don't work so much anymore. The stress right now is incredible. The new stressors that are coming in about, finances, like I mentioned, and things like that. Being stuck at home and all those kinds of things. So my suggestion is learning to, is not trying to not have those emotions, but to relate to them in a healthy way. It's the way we always try to describe it. And the way we describe it is sort of riding those a wave of emotions. Emotions do not last. Emotions are information that your body gives you to tell you when to either approach or avoid something. But sometimes our body gives us unhelpful information. And if we don't understand something, or based on past experiences or shortcuts that our mind takes, sometimes we will have emotions that are perhaps too strong for the situation or too strong to be helpful. And so learning to kind of like sit with those emotions and let them dissipate and then trying to make a healthier decision about what to do with the situation that we're faced, rather than trying to make those emotions go away, is really important. Because if we try to make emotions go away, number one, we don't learn to manage them. They just continue to come back over and over again. But number two, we often can do things that are self-destructive.
Hmm.
So if you're drinking, or you're lonely and you're calling your ex because you're sad, or things that you normally wouldn't do, and you don't want to call that ex, like in a normal situation, or you don't want to drink, or whatever it may be. um, those are all can be problematic. Not to say, and again,
Right.
everything in moderation. I'm not going to tell people they shouldn't drink alcohol, but if they're getting drunk all the time, that could be a problem. If they're getting involved in relationships that are unhealthy for them, and they're doing it based on trying to deal with these emotions they're experiencing right now, that can sometimes be problematic. Um, so I think it's really important to learn, kind of sit with those emotions until they kind of dissipate for a little while, or habituate to them a little while, and then we make a decision, based on the situations that we're faced, and that we call that sort of riding the wave. It's analogous to, like if we're trying to help somebody quit smoking, for example. This is a real simple way to think about it. They get these urges to smoke, and typically with nicotine, they're super short. They last about 15-20 minutes or something like that. So we tell people, ride that urge, sort of surf that urge. You get that urge, wait 15-20 minutes, then make a decision. Do you really need that cigarette right now? Sometimes if you're chemically addicted, your body sort of really trying to tell you that you need it, but sometimes those urges go away after a while. And emotions are the same. The way if you get fear or anxiety, you sit with it for a while, it will dissipate. And that can be challenging, because for sometimes it takes a long time for those emotions to dissipate. We have to learn how to manage these emotions. And for a lot of people, they don't have the tools that they to manage this kind of stress, because they've never faced it before, or the tools that they used to use don't work as well right now because um, they're not used to using them, or they're not used to using them in these circumstances.